Appalachia is one of the oldest mountain regions on the planet, a long green spine running down the eastern United States through Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Tennessee, and the Carolinas. Most people drive through it on the interstate and see trees, fog, and the occasional coal truck. They miss what is tucked back in the hollows. A windowless shack where gravity appears to break. A Swiss village that sets winter on fire every February. A town that publicly executed an elephant. And entire communities drowned under a lake, with a highway that was promised, started, and then simply abandoned in the woods. Make sure you stick with us to the end, because number 1 is a town that has been on fire underground for more than 60 years, with smoke still rising from the cracks in its empty streets. If you like quiet, careful deep dives into the places history forgot, subscribe now, because we publish a new one every week. Today we are counting down 10 things Appalachia is hiding that nobody talks about. Number 10. The Mystery Hole, where gravity went haywire. On a curve of US Route 60 in Ansted, West Virginia, above the New River Gorge, there is a corrugated metal shack with a giant painted clown on the front, and a 1960s Volkswagen Beetle bolted to the wall like it crashed there. Nobody minded. This is the Mystery Hole. Inside, balls roll uphill, water runs the wrong way, chairs balance where they should fall, and you cannot stand up straight no matter how hard you try. It opened in 1973. A retired Union Carbide worker named Donald Wilson built it at the tail end of America's roadside mystery spot craze, back when families on road trips would pull over for any sign, promising something they had never seen. Wilson built tilted chambers that scramble the eye and the inner ear until your sense of down stops working. Then he charged admission to confuse you on purpose. After Wilson died in the late 1990s, the place sat empty and got picked apart by vandals. A couple from Michigan, Will and Sandra Morrison, bought it and rebuilt it from old photographs to match its 1970s look. The tour still runs about 15 minutes and costs around $10. No cameras allowed inside. The signature twist is the owner himself. Will Morrison says he has turned down offers in the millions of dollars to reveal how the illusion works, and he refuses to explain it to anyone who has not taken the tour. It is a tin shack on a mountain road guarding its secret like it is the formula for Coca-Cola. And somehow that is exactly why people keep stopping. Number 9. Helvetia. The Swiss village that burns winter alive once a year. In the dead of February, a few hundred people in handmade masks march by lantern light through a tiny mountain village, then set a giant effigy of Old Man Winter on fire. This is not a reenactment staged for tourists. It is a 19th century Swiss tradition, still running in the middle of West Virginia. Helvetia sits in a remote hollow in Randolph County. It was founded in 1869 by Swiss and German immigrants who built a village that looked and sounded more like the Alps than Appalachia, and then held on to it. They kept the language, the food, and the festivals across generations. The town today has a population of around 50. The festival is called Fastnacht, held the Saturday before Ash Wednesday. It comes from a Swiss custom that dates back to roughly 1520, a feast before the fasting of Lent. Helvetia's version blends it with a Zurich tradition in which an effigy of winter is burned to welcome spring. There are homemade masks, a lantern parade, fatty food, square dancing, and at the end of the night, the fire. It started small. The modern revival began with just 2 masked participants. By 2025, it drew around 850 people, and in February 2026, the 59th Fastnacht pulled in thousands, all funneling into a village of 50. Getting there is part of the story. There is no cell service in Helvetia and GPS is unreliable. The nearest gas station is about 5 miles away. There is a payphone by the Star Band Hall, which tells you most of what you need to know about the pace of the place. The Hut restaurant, open since 1968, still serves Swiss food, and Helvetia was among the first communities allowed to make unpasteurized cheese in the home. A town of 50 people spends all year preparing to set winter on fire, then goes quiet again. They have been doing it since before your great-grandparents were born. Number 8. Rugby. The failed utopia for England's spare sons. In Victorian England, the law of primogeniture handed a family's entire estate to the eldest son. The younger sons inherited nothing. No land, no title, no clear path. A famous English novelist named Thomas Hughes, the author of Tom Brown's School Days, decided to do something about it. He would build them a colony, not in England, on the Cumberland Plateau of Tennessee. Rugby opened in 1880. Hughes imagined a class-free, cooperative, Christian community where these educated, landless young men could work the soil with dignity and live without the rigid hierarchy of home. For a few years, it almost worked. The colonists built roughly 70 Victorian buildings. including a public library in 1882 and an Episcopal church in 1887. They held theater nights, literary clubs, and croquet matches, and they named their inn the Tabard, after the one in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Then reality arrived. These were men raised never to do manual labor, trying to farm thin, rocky plateau soil. The population reached about 300 by the summer of 1881, and that same summer, a typhoid epidemic swept through and killed 7 settlers. Most of the colony fled. By the end of the year, around 60 people were left. Hughes poured roughly $100,000 of his own money into the dream. Lawsuits over land titles, fires, and the bad soil finished what the typhoid started. By 1887, the experiment had effectively failed, but Rugby never fully died. About 20 of the original 60-plus buildings still stand, preserved as historic Rugby on the edge of the Big South Fork. The 1887 church still holds Sunday service. You can stay overnight in the historic lodgings. The population now sits at around 85. A group of English gentlemen tried to escape their own class system by farming a Tennessee mountain, and a fever undid them in a single summer. The library they built outlasted the dream by more than a century. Number 7. Thurmond, the town with no streets. Thurmond, West Virginia, never had a real street. Not because it was too small, but because there was no room. It was wedged so tightly between a cliff and the New River that the railroad tracks themselves served as Main Street. People did their shopping along the rail line, and for a while that line made Thurmond rich. Deep in the New River Gorge coalfields, the town grew up around the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway and became one of its busiest revenue points. By the 1920s, it had roughly 500 residents, 2 banks, 2 hotels, and a movie theater. It reportedly handled more freight than the city of Cincinnati. Across the river stood the Dunglen Hotel, and according to Ripley's, it hosted the longest continuous poker game in the world, a game said to have run for 14 years straight. Here is how fast it fell apart. The Dunglen burned down in 1930. Then, around 1949, the C&O Railway switched from steam engines to diesel. Steam trains had to stop in Thurmond for coal and water. Diesel trains did not. The single reason the town existed simply evaporated. The depot closed. People left. The 2020 census recorded a population of 5. That makes Thurmond the least populous municipality in West Virginia. Some recent counts put it at 3. Today, the National Park Service owns about 80% of the town, more than 20 buildings. As part of New River Gorge National Park, the 1904 depot was restored in 1995 and now serves as a visitor center, and it is still an Amtrak flag stop. You can walk the old commercial row, past the empty bank and the hulking coaling tower, and hear nothing but the river and the occasional freight train. A town that once moved more coal than a major city now answers to 5 people. And Park Ranger, the trains still come through. They just do not stop for anyone anymore. Number 6. Green Bank. The town where the signal died. Drive west toward Green Bank, West Virginia, and somewhere near the Virginia line your phone gives up. The bars vanish. The notifications stop. Travelers are told to print their directions, because GPS will not save you out here. You have entered the National Radio Quiet Zone. The zone was created in 1958, a roughly 13,000 square mile area set aside to protect radio astronomy from human interference. At its center, in Pocahontas County, stands the Robert C. Byrd Green Bank Telescope, the largest fully steerable radio telescope on Earth. About 485 feet tall, it listens for impossibly faint signals from pulsars and distant galaxies, and almost anything humans switch on can drown those signals out. A sign at the observatory claims the telescope is sensitive enough to detect your phone on Saturn, set to airplane mode, so near the dish the rules get strict. Fixed transmitters, cell towers, Wi-Fi routers, Bluetooth, even microwave ovens are restricted, and a leaky microwave might have to live inside a metal cage. It is worth being precise here. The broad zone mostly limits permanent transmitters, and hundreds of thousands of people inside its outer edges still have Wi-Fi and phones. The hard restrictions cluster within about 10 miles of the telescope. But that quiet did something nobody planned. Starting around 2007, people who believe that Wi-Fi and cell signals make them physically ill began moving to the area on purpose. They call themselves Wi-Fi refugees. They came to Green Bank, a town of roughly 143 people, specifically because the modern world's hum is turned down here by law. A federal science project, built to hear the edge of the universe, accidentally became a sanctuary for people fleeing the 21st century. They live in the quiet on purpose. Quick pause. If you are finding this interesting, drop a like on the video. It genuinely helps these stories reach more people. And I am curious which one has surprised you most so far. The burning Swiss effigy, the town with no streets, or the desert we are about to get to? Tell me in the comments, because from here, the countdown gets darker. The last few stories involve a public execution, drowned towns, and a fire that will outlive all of us. Number 5. The Copper Basin, the man-made desert you could see from space. For most of the 20th century, astronauts in orbit could pick out only a handful of human-made features on the surface of the Earth. One of them was the Great Wall of China. Another was a 50-square-mile patch of bare red ground where Tennessee, Georgia, and North Carolina meet. People called it the Ducktown Desert. It was the only true desert east of the Mississippi, and people made it by accident. The story starts with copper. Prospectors came chasing an 1843 gold rush, found copper instead, and by the 1850s the mines were booming. The problem was the smelting. To pull copper from the rock, companies clear-cut the surrounding forest for fuel and roasted the ore in open heaps. That process released enormous clouds of sulfur dioxide, which fell back to Earth as acid rain. Within just a few years, every tree, bush, and blade of grass for about 50 square miles was dead. The hills eroded down to red clay. The damage drifted across state lines, and Georgia sued. In 1907, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Georgia's favor, in an opinion written by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. It became one of the earliest environmental rulings in American history. The company responded by capturing the sulfur and turning it into sulfuric acid, which became the area's main product. Then came the slow repair. Beginning in the 1930s, the TVA and others planted huge numbers of pine and locust trees, year after year, for decades. It worked. The red desert greened over and is no longer visible from orbit. Today, the Burra Burra mine is a museum, the first state historic industrial site in Tennessee, and one patch of bare red rock has been deliberately left unhealed, so people can still see what was here. We spend a lot of energy worrying about what nature might do to us. This is a place where a few decades of human industry turned mountains into Mars, and it took the better part of a century to take it back. Number 4. Erwin, the town that hanged an elephant. On September 13, 1916, a crowd of somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 people gathered in a railroad yard in Erwin, Tennessee, to watch the town execute an elephant. They hanged her from an industrial crane. This is not a legend. There is a photograph, and its authenticity has been confirmed. Her name was Mary, a 5-ton circus elephant who traveled with the Sparks world-famous shows. The day before, in nearby Kingsport, the circus had hired a new and inexperienced handler named Walter Eldridge. He prodded Mary with a hooked stick. She seized him with her trunk and killed him. What happened next was driven less by justice than by business. Word spread fast, and nearby towns refused to let the circus perform as long as the elephant that killed a man was still alive. The owner, Charles Sparks, was facing the ruin of his entire show, so he made a decision. He would kill Mary in public to prove she was gone and save the business. The trouble was a practical question almost no one had ever had to answer. How do you execute a 5-ton animal? The rural area had no way to electrocute her. Sparks settled on hanging. They chose Erwin because it had what was needed, a roughly 100-ton railroad crane car in the Clinchfield yard. Erwin was a railroad boomtown then, its population nearly tripling in the first 16 years of the century, built around the Clinchfield repair shops. The crane was a tool of that industry, and it became the gallows. The first attempt failed. They raised her up and the chain snapped, dropping Mary to the ground and reportedly breaking her hip. They brought a heavier chain and finished it in front of the crowd, which included a great many children. Erwin has spent over a century living in the shadow of one foggy, rainy afternoon. The town has tried to move past it. In 2019, a group of Erwin High School students made an award-winning podcast about Mary, not to celebrate the story but to understand it, and to talk about protecting elephants now. A town of about 6,000 people did one terrible thing on one bad day in 1916, and it followed them for generations. The kids who grew up there are the ones now trying to make it mean something better. Number 3. The Road to Nowhere, a Broken Promise. Just outside Bryson City, North Carolina, a paved road leads into the Great Smoky Mountains, runs about 6 miles into the forest, and then stops at the mouth of a dark tunnel. No barrier, no town, no reason. The road simply ends. Locals gave it a name. A hand-maintained sign near the trailhead reads, "Welcome to the Road to Nowhere, a Broken Promise, 1943 to question mark." To understand the anger in that sign, you have to go back to World War II. The country needed aluminum for aircraft and ships, and aluminum needs enormous amounts of electricity. So the TVA built Fontana Dam, the tallest dam east of the Rockies at about 480 feet, to power the Alcoa plants. To do it, the government took roughly 67,800 acres in Swain and Gramines. The rising water became Fontana Lake, and the lake swallowed communities. The town of Judson went underwater. The lumber town of Proctor was emptied out. Families were bought out and moved off land that had been theirs for generations. Worst of all, they left behind their family cemeteries, now cut off by miles of water and wilderness. So the government made a promise. It would build a new road, about 30 miles along the north shore of the lake, so those families could still reach the graves of their ancestors. Construction started. Then it stopped, after about 6 or 7 miles in one tunnel, halted by cost and environmental problems. It was never finished. The promise just sat there, unkept, for decades. The fight dragged on for most of a lifetime. Finally, in 2010, the federal government agreed to pay Swain County around $52 million instead of building the road. After a lawsuit, the last payment arrived in 2018, but money was never really the point. To this day, the National Park Service ferries aging descendants across Fontana Lake by boat each year, on Decoration Day, so they can visit and tend the cemeteries they were promised a road to. When the water drops in winter, people say you can sometimes see the tops of old structures break the surface. A whole community gave up its homes for the war effort, and in return got a road that runs 6 miles into the woods and stops. They are still taking the boat to visit their dead. Number 2. New Vrindaban and the Palace of Gold. The Golden Palace, built by a cult, drive a narrow back road over a ridge above Moundsville, West Virginia, through ordinary Appalachian woods and farmland, and a building appears that does not belong to this landscape at all. Gold domes, marble, stained glass, fountains, rose gardens, a lotus pond, and peacocks wandering the grounds. People have called it the Taj Mahal of the West. It was built almost entirely by hand by people who had never built anything. It began in 1968 when 2 early American followers of the Hare Krishna movement, Keith Ham and Howard Wheeler, leased 133 acres here on a 99-year term for about $4,000. They named it New Vrindaban after a holy Indian city. The plan was a simple residence for their spiritual teacher, Prabhupada. After he died in 1977, the project grew into something far grander, a memorial palace, dedicated in 1979. Devotees taught themselves to lay marble and apply gold leaf, learning as they went. The materials alone reportedly cost about $600,000, and the labor was unpaid, done for faith and funded in part by donations the devotees collected famously in America's airports. At its peak in the 1980s, the community had around 500 devotees and sprawled across thousands of acres, with gardens, peacocks, and an elephant named Malini. Hundreds of thousands of visitors came to see the Golden Palace in the hills. Here is the part most visitors never hear standing in those gardens. Under its leader, by then known as Kirtanananda Swami, the community turned dark. 2 people connected to it were murdered, a member named Charles Saint, Dennis in 1983, and a former devotee named Stephen Bryant, who was shot in Los Angeles in 1986 while publishing accusations against the leadership. In 1990, Kirtanananda was indicted on federal racketeering charges. He was convicted, saw that conviction overturned on appeal, and in 1996 pleaded guilty to racketeering and was sent to prison. He had been expelled from the wider Krishna movement back in 1987, and he died in 2011. The palace is still there. It is being restored, the temple and gardens are open, a smaller community remains, and you can tour it. It sits fittingly, not far from the old West Virginia penitentiary. Thousands of people gave their hands and their savings to build something genuinely beautiful in those hills, and the man at the top turned it into a crime scene. The gold is real, so is everything that happened underneath it. Number 1. Centralia, the town that has been on fire for over 60 years. You turn off a back road in the Pennsylvania coal country, and at first you are not sure you are anywhere at all. There is a street grid, but the streets lead to empty lots. Sidewalks run up to staircases that climb to nothing. The grass grows in odd, lush patches, greener than it should be. On a cold, damp day, you see it. Thin ribbons of smoke and steam rising straight out of the ground, curling up through cracks in the pavement. The earth is warm under your feet. Somewhere below you, faintly, you can hear it, a low hiss of gas escaping. Snow will not stay on parts of this ground. It melts from underneath. This is Centralia, and the smoke is not a metaphor. There is a fire burning beneath the town, and it has been burning since 1962. Centralia sat on top of a maze of anthracite coal mines. In May 1962, the borough set fire to the trash in an old strip mine pit it used as a dump, a routine cleanup before Memorial Day. The fire found an unsealed opening into the coal seams below and went down into them. And the coal, it turned out, was effectively infinite fuel. Crews tried to put it out and failed. It has been spreading underground ever since. across an area of about 3,700 acres. By some estimates, it could keep burning for more than 250 years. For about 2 decades, people simply lived with it. The ground grew warm. Gases seeped into basements. Then, on Valentine's Day in 1981, the earth opened up beneath a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski. He dropped into a steaming sinkhole roughly 150 feet deep and saved his own life by grabbing a tree root, hanging over the heat until his cousin pulled him out. That was the turning point. As carbon monoxide levels climbed and more sinkholes appeared, the government acted. A federal program in the early 1980s funded relocation. In 1992, Pennsylvania condemned the entire borough by eminent domain. In 2002, the Postal Service revoked the town's zip code. One by one, the buildings came down. The numbers tell the whole arc. In the early 20th century, Centralia had somewhere between 2,500 and 2,800 residents. Today, about 5 people remain, holdouts who fought to stay. And so it sits, a near-empty grid in the green Pennsylvania hills, a buckled, abandoned stretch of old Route 61 that became a canvas for graffiti. Cemeteries that families still visit and maintain, while the ground around them quietly smokes. No zip code, almost no people. A town the map gave up on. The fire does not care about any of that. It will still be burning long after the last holdout is gone, long after anyone remembers the names of the streets. Centralia is not a ghost town haunted by its past. It is a town being slowly erased by something that is still right now very much alive underground. Appalachia is full of these. Places that got rich and then got forgotten, built on faith or stubbornness or a promise nobody kept. For me, the one that stays is Centralia, a town with a fire underneath it that will outlast everyone who ever lived there. That image does not leave. Which of these surprised you most? And what did we miss? Tell me in the comments. And if these forgotten corners of America are your kind of story, subscribe and stick around, because there are plenty more out there.